Hey, welcome back to Builder Funnel Radio. This is episode 67 with Daniel Allen of Trademutt. And in this conversation, we dive into Daniel's background and kind of how he transitioned into what they're doing over at Trademutt. And we get into a very important conversation around mental health and what they're doing to help spread the word there. There's a couple really powerful stories in the episode. I think it'll be a little bit different of an episode, but I think you'll really enjoy it. And it'll also open your eyes to some things that maybe we're not aware of. And we kind of talk about some the invisible nature behind mental health. So a very important episode. I hope you guys really enjoy it. Stay tuned for episode 67 with Daniel Allen. Hey, Daniel, glad to have you on the show today.
How you going, Spencer?
It's going good. How about yourself?
Yeah, mate, going great. Happy to be
here. Yeah. I'm excited for the conversation today. I think it's a very important one that we're going to talk about. But before we get too deep in the weeds, maybe you can give us a little bit of your backstory, kind of how you got into construction and all that good stuff.
Yeah, mate. Well, I'm coming to you from beautiful Brisbane in Australia at the moment, but I'm not actually originally from here. I'm Sydney born and bred, so
okay.
New South Welshman, south of the border. They don't really like us up here in Queensland because we've got a fierce rivalry, but yeah, so you got to keep that on the low down. But yeah, mate, yeah, don't tell anyone. Yeah, so I come from Sydney, mate. Pretty humble family, single parent family. Got two brothers. Mum's a midwife, put us through school. So, we watched her work hard all her life. So I think we all sort of gained a really good work ethic from the old girl. But came to the end of my schooling, high school, and I guess I was pretty unsure of what I wanted to do. I thought, construction seemed appealing to me. I wasn't sure whether it was going to be through uni to do like some construction management or something like that. Got into uni, but kind of just wasn't really feeling the vibe. I thought, I definitely want to go down this path. I want to do something hands-on. So I thought, well, let's have a crack at an apprenticeship and, build it up that way, because I think if you're going to get into the industry, you need to understand it from the ground up. So yeah, managed to snag an apprenticeship with the Master Builders Association of New South Wales, who put me into a job down around Sydney Harbour foreshore. So I got to work around the great big Sydney Harbour Bridge and, doing some really cool heritage carpentry and all that sort of stuff around there. But it wasn't really where it didn't seem to be, a long-term, I guess, job. I wasn't building houses. I needed to be building houses. So I went from sort of job to job, ended up doing some pretty, ended up working on some housing commission, public housing out in Western Sydney, and saw some pretty, not nice stuff. And so I was feeling pretty disillusioned because I couldn't find myself in what I perceived to be, high-end home building, right? And so had a work injury, cut my thumb halfway through my thumb, severed the tendons and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, this is when I was a second year apprentice, and I thought, well, I just don't know if this is going in the right direction for me. I can't seem to land in the right job, and I've just had this injury. So, I might be ready to throw in the towel here. So I got connected to, through some family who were up in Brisbane, a builder up here. And he said, mate, look, we're just about to kick off some really nice high-end duplexes up here in a nice suburb in Brisbane. If you want to come up and work for a couple of weeks, by all means, jump in and drive up here. We got some work for you. So that was in 2010. Drove up for 2 weeks and never went back. So found a new home in Brisbane, and it was a change that I didn't know I needed. Sydney's an awesome town, and it'll always be home, but it's a pretty fast-paced, hustle-bustle type of operation, and Brisbane's a little slower, which is my kind of vibe. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah, ended up here, and it just stayed, made a life for myself, got through my apprenticeship, and mate, love it. Love the carpentry, love the move, love getting out and hands-on and being able to look at something that you've built and completed. You get a real sense of satisfaction at the end of a hard day's work, right? So yeah,
absolutely.
One of the things I love the most.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, and I know, after you got up there and you said, 2 weeks turned into a few years, and I think it was, several years, but then you made another transition into what you're doing now with Trademutt. But I was hoping you could share with our listeners kind of the story behind that, and why you're doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, mate, for sure. So couple years out of my time. So yeah, I've been in Brisbane for 10 years now. So 2 years out of my carpentry apprenticeship, 2014. I started working for a builder up here, again, another builder, and met another fellow on site who was on his first day of his apprenticeship, Ed Ross, and he's a come off mustering cattle in central West Queensland. He's a true cowboy, and I'm from Sydney, and there's no real reason why we should have got along with each other, but we have a common love of Jim Carrey, and we could quote every Jim Carrey movie till the cows come home. So, and it just made us laugh a lot, So having that sense of humor with another person is one of the best things to form a bond, right? So that got us kicked off, and we started working together and building that relationship. And then in 2015, the end of 2015, I lost one of my best mates to suicide. So that was, as with the nature of that act, it's completely unexpected. Really came out of nowhere. No one saw it coming, and so that, for me, going through that in 2015 was probably the hardest thing that I've ever experienced. Super confusing. It was my first experience with suicide, and it really opened up this whole world of mental health and, looking at the landscape and what was out there, and it sort of really struck a chord with me and something that I wanted to impact. And so, as I said, Ed and I had made a real formidable partnership, and we had all these ideas, working together. As you do, you talk absolute crap all day, every day. It's how you get through your day. And one of the things that we always talked about was, how cool would it be to start a funky workwear brand, Oh, just hot air, you know what I mean? Because we were sick of wearing the same thing to work every day, your navy, your khaki, whatever. And we kept talking about this workwear brand, and then what happened in 2015 happened, and this conversation continued. But through that grieving process back at work, Ed was my number one support network throughout the day. So he was there to with me to process that whole thing, and we kept looking at this workwear piece, and we started to actually try and do it. And when we started designing, some work shirts and whatnot, we met some different people along the way, as you do, asking questions, looking for help. How do we do this? We know how to build houses, but we don't know how to build work shirts. And we met a fellow by the name of Peter Ball, and he introduced us to the concept of social enterprise, which we knew nothing about. And so that's using profit for purpose and having, a socially conscious aspect to your business. So given what had been through in 2015, losing one of my best mates, we thought, well, maybe we can use these bright, funky work shirts as a way of starting conversations about mental health for tradies and blue collar workers and, farmers and rural and remote communities. And I guess the approach has been to take a bit more of a colourful and light-hearted approach to the mental health conversation in an effort to create camaraderie and get blokes on board and get blokes talking. And as we say, make an invisible issue impossible to ignore. So it's a crazy turn of events that would lead me from being a carpenter to founding Trademutt, which is our social enterprise workwear company. But here we are.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting how those things kind of end up the dots sort of connect and lead you to that, that next thing. I'm curious to hear a little bit more from you about just, mental health and kind of how big of a deal is that in the construction space? I mean, obviously you went through this very traumatic experience with your friend, and going through that, I'm sure it kind of opened your eyes to, hey, maybe this is a larger, discussion and a larger thing we need to tackle. But I mean, how much is this impacting the industry?
It's impacting the industry immensely. It's impacting this country as a whole immensely, and I think it's impacting. I think this is a global issue. As we've looked into it more, it's a huge issue in New Zealand. I'm sure it's a massive issue across in the States as well. But what's become bleedingly obvious is that it's just, I think there's such a lack of understanding around what mental health actually is and means. I mean, there's lots of statistics around, we don't like to talk too much about statistics in our day-to-day operation because I guess we believe that telling people how bad the situation is kind of isn't really helping to change, the culture around it. But, the reality is that in Australia, six blokes every day are taking their own life. And the other statistic around the construction industry is that one tradie every 2 days takes their life. So,
Wow.
it is a big issue, but it's not being spoken about enough or in the right tone. I think for a long time, the conversation around mental health has been, obviously because it's invisible when you can't see it, well, it's much harder to talk about. We always talk about, one thing that people always say in this conversation is, look, if you had if you broke your leg and you had a bone hanging out of your leg, like you're not going to limp around like nothing's wrong. You're going to go to the doctor and you're going to get it fixed. But the thing is with that is you can see the bone hanging out of your leg. There's an issue. You can feel the pain. That the logical thing is to go.
Yeah.
It's obvious. That the logical thing is to go and do it. The issue around mental health is that being invisible, most people don't know how bad their situation is or at what point to seek help, because there's nothing to really measure it against, So our understanding of the space, there's a real lack of education and understanding about what mental health is, and the fact that we actually all do have mental health, and it's not just a negative thing as it's always spoken about. So education is the key, my man.
Yeah. And I know you and I were talking. You said you kind of talk about it on a spectrum, and so I guess maybe share a little bit about what you mean by that spectrum, and like you said, it's not necessarily always on the negative side. I would imagine people can have positive, mental health or negative, and it's not just like a broken bone or a fixed bone.
Exactly right. Good health, bad health, right? It's made, yeah, exactly right. Well, that's as you say, yeah, you're right. So mental health is a spectrum, and often the conversation for mental health is, oh, geez, I've got, depression or anxiety, and it's like they're the only things we correlate with mental health. But the spectrum that it is on also includes a really positive end, like happiness, fun, and love and joy, and that's all the good side of mental health. And we're not probably talking about that enough. When we have conversations with people all the time, and they're like, oh, I'm suffering from mental health. And it's like, well, no, you're not suffering from mental health. Like you just, you might be in a state where you're suffering from poor mental health at the moment, but mental health in itself is a really good thing. And it's not anything to be afraid of, and understanding mental health and understanding what it actually means. It's empowering, man. It's really empowering to actually understand yourself and understand, your triggers and when you might be sliding and what you can actually do, in those times to improve and to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah. So how do you, is there a way to kind of self-diagnose where you might be on the spectrum on any given day? Or, like you said, it's kind of this invisible thing at times, especially as an outsider looking to somebody else. If I'm looking at you, it's not like I can see clearly necessarily that, you have a broken bone, just to go back to that example. But, are there good steps that people can take either for others or for themselves to kind of just say like, hey, here's where I might be on the spectrum, and then ways to course correct if you're maybe on the negative end of that spectrum?
I think it takes, essentially, it's going to just take a lot of self-reflection and to be honest with yourself. You know what I mean? A lot of people put up facades of success and happiness because, it's in a competitive world, it's no one really wants to look weak. And this is one of the biggest issues I think that we face is the fact that this competitive nature really drives us to think that everyone has these perfect lives. And so when you hear of suicides, and we hear of suicides all the time, it's the same old story. Oh, he was so happy. Oh, there were no signs. He was the happy-go-lucky, person. It was everyone's mate. His life looked perfect on the outside. And so I think one of our biggest things that we try to get across is about vulnerability and being comfortable being vulnerable, because it's when you are vulnerable that you find out the most about yourselves. And if vulnerability means pretending or not pretending that your life is as perfect as you make it out to be, because the reality is it's not. We all go through the same shit, right? Everyone's got bills to pay. Everyone's got relationships, houses to keep over their heads. And to quote Warwick Bidwell from one of our most recent podcasts, everyone sits down to take a crap, mate. You know what I mean? So we're all the same. We all go through the same stuff, but we're kind of pretending that we're not. So back to your question, are there things that we can do to self-regulate? It's about being as open and honest with yourself as possible, and trying to harness and find a way to embrace vulnerability and being okay with that. Because once you find that ability to stop caring about what other people might think of you, well, then that's when you really learn the most about yourself and can get on living your own life.
Yeah, I think it's good advice. I mean, especially the honesty piece. I think it's easy to say, but it's harder to do, to actually, look at yourself and go, how am I doing? How do I actually feel? And am I trying to portray things to the external, world, friends, family, people on social media that we don't even know? Are we trying to prove something to them, and why? And yeah, are you really happy? Are you doing the things that make you happy? So I think it's hard to do, easy to say, but yeah, spot on. And so, what are you guys doing at Trademutt? I mean, you're wearing the shirt right now, which I love. And, kind of what's your mission, and how are you guys trying to tackle this big challenge?
Mate, the mission in front of us is to shift the culture. And that's when it comes to mental health, we're taking on one of the most difficult social issues in what we're doing. And so I look at other social enterprises out there, and it's, we've got one in Australia called Who Gives a Crap, and you buy a roll of toilet paper and, half the profits go to building toilets in third world countries. Or you buy thank you water, and it's half the profits go towards building, wells and water sources in third world countries. So it's quite quantifiable. What we're trying to do on our mission is shift the culture, shift perception, and drive that change in attitude towards mental health. And as we say, basically encouraging people to cut the shit. And that's one of the biggest things, So we've just established our own foundation as well, because we see one of the biggest issues in the mental health space around help-seeking behavior among men. We suck at seeking help. And you would know we suck at seeking help for our businesses in our professional lives. We suck at seeking help for, sickness and health, and that includes mental health. We're very stoic, and we like to, tackle it all ourselves. So
yeah, it's true.
That's one of the big things we want to be able to change is help-seeking behavior. And so when I look at the mental health space, to be able to go and talk to a professional, it costs a lot of money. It's expensive, right? And if you decide you want to go and talk to a professional, you need to go to your GP, a doctor, basically have it out with them and tell them that you're struggling and all this and that, and then they'll put you on a mental health plan. Now, you go on a mental health plan, that goes on your permanent health record, right? And this is to get subsidized access to mental health professionals, psychologists, and et cetera. So already there's barriers to people being able to access help, because if you can't afford to get to a professional, you need to go to your GP, get on a mental health plan, goes on your permanent record. It affects, things like insurances and all that sort of stuff. So there are so many people out there who already aren't going to go and do that because they know that, it's got negative impacts. So our goal with our foundation is to remove the physical and financial barriers that exist to being able to access mental health professionals. So the first project that we're doing is opening up a 24/7 text service direct to clinical psychologists, free of charge, 24/7. It's a discreet service. It's simple and appealing for blokes because you don't need to actually communicate out of your mouth. Although we're all about having conversations about mental health, we still suck at doing it. So we want to be able to remove all those barriers to people being able to actually access a professional in the first instance. But the shirts will always be the Trojan horse for that. So we use the work shirts to create camaraderie around the movement, have conversations about mental health, talk about it. It's all good. And then if you actually want to be able to seek help, we're about to open up this text service and try to improve that help-seeking behaviour for blokes, because if you can just get them to talk that once, well, then that's half the battle won. If you can just get them to reach out that one time, you're almost there, right? So
yeah,
we're going to be able to make it as easy as possible across the board.
That's super cool. Yeah, and so obviously the shirts are kind of dual purpose. That allows you guys to kind of spread the word and spread the movement, but then also that part of those proceeds go towards funding things like this text service. And that's
exactly right.
Yeah, very cool. So I'm interested, I'm sure now, as you guys have been selling some shirts and getting, the word out, I'm curious just to hear if you have any cool stories of, things that have happened, you see somebody wearing the shirt or, other people or conversations that have been started or just things that you're hearing about as the movement starts to build.
Mate, where do I start? These stories,
yeah,
maybe at the start. The stories have been incredible, mate. It's been super uplifting. I can tell you the most recent story, which is yesterday. So we were contacted by, we've got a family out in Claremont, which is out in Queensland, and they got around our shirts and they've been wearing them, sending us photos and all this sort of stuff. Now that family's got a young fella called Oscar. He's just turned 12 years old. Now he loves Trademutt shirts. He's got his own Trademutt shirt. Now I didn't know this, right? But Oscar was born 16 weeks prematurely 12 years ago. It was his birthday yesterday. His mother was flown from Claremont in an emergency flight by the Royal Flying Doctor Service of Australia, which is a fantastic service. And this kid shouldn't have lived. He was on life support for 2 months, I think, after he was born. My mum's a midwife, and I've chatted to her about this, and she's like, that kid shouldn't have lived. So he's survived, right? And 12 years later, actually 11 years later, he started growing a mullet. Like, he started growing all his hair out. Massive, awesome, curly hair, mate. It's unbelievable. You should see it. I'll have to send you through some pictures. He's growing the best mullet I've ever seen. And he's decided that he wants to start raising money for the Royal Flying Doctor Service to repay the service that saved his and his mother's life. Now, he's done the whole thing in Trademutt shirts because he wants to rep the brand. He loves, how uplifting it is, and his dad loves it. And so his aim was to raise $500 for the RFDS. Now, $12,000 later, and his birthday yesterday, his grandmother shaved his hair off. It's all gone now, and there's this whopping check for the Flying Doctors, $12,000. It's absolutely unbelievable, and I've been wearing Trademutt the whole time. Now that's just the best, right? So little did I know, I spoke to his mother last night, Rhiannon. Now she filled us in the fact that after that traumatic birth, the father, Brendan, actually suffered severe PTSD. It's a really traumatic experience for anyone to go through, like that. So he's had severe PTSD for a long time. And she told us that he discovered Trademutt and the shirts and what they stood for. And being a country fella from Queensland, it resonated with him. It was a fun way to get around, the mental health conversation. And it's just completely uplifted him and changed him, and the whole family's behind it. And he now feels empowered to talk openly about what he's been through, and the fact that he did suffer severe PTSD going through that traumatic childbirth, and that's a thing that happens to a lot of people, and that's okay. And the ability to talk about it and be open with it is what's going to empower other blokes and other people to be okay and comfortable with some of the stuff that they've been through. So, mate, that was yesterday. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't
that's
see
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
Didn't see that coming, but it's just unbelievable. I've got to send you some pictures of this mullet, mate. It's
Please
unbelievable.
do. Yeah. I've
A
got it.
Tennessee waterfall, as you guys might call it.
Oh man. Well, I'm glad that it's shaved off now at this point. Mission accomplished. But yeah,
Yeah,
no,
dude.
that's awesome. Yes, thanks for sharing the story. And
Yeah.
I guess, how can people, connect with Trademutt or find some of these shirts for themselves and that sort of thing?
Mate, we're all online, so it's all Trademutt, trademutt.com for the website. We're across Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, even. We're on YouTube now with our podcast. Our podcast is called Trademutt's 120 Grit, a podcast for the working class. So yeah, we're trying to. The idea of the podcast on our end is actually having the conversations that we preach about, actually showing blokes having these conversations, talking about real stuff, much like you and I are talking about now. But, trying to lead by example. And I think that's the best way that we can actually continue to drive this cultural shift, is to show, recognizable people having these hard conversations. So yeah, if anyone wants to get around it, yeah, mate, the website, trademutt.com, or yeah, the socials is where it's at. So yeah, and we ship to the States. We actually shipped an order on Monday to Sunset Beach
Oh yeah.
in California, I believe. So yeah, man, stoked. So you might see a few pumping around there.
Yeah, I hope I see more and more of them. But yeah, for anybody listening, we'll link those up in the show notes so you guys can check out the podcast, but also, of course, check out the website and see some of the shirts. And if you're listening to this on audio, definitely go watch the YouTube version. And Daniel's sporting one of the shirts, and they're awesome. So
this is the Mr. Feelgood. They're all named. We've named a lot of our stuff after Jim Carrey movies as well. So if anyone
I
picks
like
that
it.
up, this is the Mr. Feelgood. So yeah, one of the original bestseller.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on the show and being willing to talk about this and share your story and kind of how you got into it, but also sharing just another story from how it's impacting real people. And I know that was just one of many since you guys have started this, but we always like to close our podcast with a quick segment of the show called the Fast Five. So it's kind of rapid fire questions. I'll throw them at you, and just whatever comes to mind, you answer away. But first one is, what's your favorite business book and why?
I had to think about this. I don't actually read business books, so
okay, that's all right.
I'll tell you my favorite book.
All right, we'll do favorite book.
The Happiest Refugee. Ando. He's a refugee from Vietnam. He's a much loved Australian comedian. Incredible story about resilience, grit, determination, and just he's such one of the most lovable characters you'll ever meet. He started out on kids TV. He's in comedy, and now he's got his own awesome show called Arn's Brush with Fame. He's an artist. He's just an incredible example of what you can achieve coming out of adversity. So that inspires me, and that inspires me in business.
That's cool. That's awesome. Well, and speaking of inspiring, I guess, who is the most inspirational person in your life?
Mate, it'd be rude of me not to say my mother. She's absolutely everything. She's where I get my hard work ethic from. And yeah, if you're not inspired by your mother, then I don't know what you'd be inspired by.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. All right, next question is, if you could have one superpower, what would that be?
Geez, superpower. This is a hard one, mate. I would have said like teleporting, but actually I had this conversation with Josh in our office yesterday. I said, superpower, what's it going to be? And he said to me, mate, someone asked me what superpower I'd want to use the other day, and he said the ability to give people self-confidence. And I thought, man,
That's a cool one.
For me, teleporting, but I've never heard the self-confidence one. Yeah. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, you and I are the same, because teleporting is the one that I would choose as well. So I've been kind of waiting for somebody to finally jump on the teleportation bandwagon.
I mean, it's obvious, right?
Right. Totally. All right. Describe yourself in 3 words.
larrikin, fun, and what we say to everyone when we go and talk at building sites is I'm a dickhead, but an Aussie dickhead. It's an endearing thing.
Gotcha. Okay. A little bit different terminology over here, so I'm glad you
mate. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, and final question is, if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would that be?
Life's too short to worry about what other people think about you. Worry less about what other people think about you, and just do what you want to do. Life's too short to try and please other people. We spend too much time trying to fill our lives with clutter that we don't need to impress people that we don't even care about. So yeah, finding a way to stop caring about what other people think of you, and just find happiness within yourself, because that's all that matters.
I love it. That's great advice. And yeah, Daniel, thanks again for joining me today. This was awesome. I think it will kind of open some eyes for people listening. And yeah, I hope a bunch of people go and grab some shirts and start spreading the word some more.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure, Spencer. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, look forward to following your journey as well, mate.
All right. Thanks again, Daniel.
Good on you, mate. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again on Builder Funnel Radio. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Daniel Allen. And I think this topic is a really, really important one. So my action item for today for you, I've just got one, and that's to just get more familiar with the topic of mental health. We kind of talked about this spectrum and that there's positive and negative sides to it. And I'd encourage you to check out their podcast that they have going on. We'll make sure we link that up in the show notes. But I think just increasing awareness is a good next step. And obviously, if you want to support them by buying the shirts, that's fantastic. But at the very least, go check out the podcast, see what kinds of conversations they're having. And if anything, I think this was a very important conversation. I know it opened my eyes to kind of this world. And like we talked about, it's a little bit of an invisible world. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Builder Funnel Radio.